Today we have the wonderful pleasure of moving into music, and we are going to discuss the Richard Halley, Ayn Rand's character. I call it Haley occasionally. Ayn Rand's wonderful character, Richard Halley, and we get a view of the arts, and we get a view of uh, the life of an artist, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we also get a view of how Ayn Rand uses music throughout Atlas Shrugged with Richard Halley. But before we begin, we will turn to Andy for the disclaimer.
Well, you know, this is a mystery story, so there's a lot of spoilers that come up in this series. So you want to make sure you read the book first, and then come to this series. So that's what the disclaimer guy is intent on disclaiming today. Read the book first, then watch the series. That's it.
Okay, so we are very briefly introduced to Richard Halley from just a few, somebody whistling, the brakeman on the Comet, whistling his fifth concerto. And Dagny is listening to it as she's half asleep on the Comet, just really enjoying it. And then she realizes, she asks the brakeman, "What is that? That's Richard Halley, right?" And he said it's his fifth. And then she said he hasn't written a fifth. And the brakeman becomes very weird and says, "Oh, I made a mistake." Then we hear a little bit more about Halleys Story, and I want to start there. Dagny and Francisco love his music. They discovered it together. And Dagny, we hear about it through Dagny. Dagny's walking the streets and she's seeing what the current culture is offering. The vulture is molting in nightclubs, but not nice nightclubs. And she goes home and she turns on the fourth concerto. So we are going to hear about Richard Halley through Ayn Rand's description of this concerto. The concerto was a great cry of rebellion. It was a no flung at some vast process of torture, a denial of suffering, a denial that held the agony of the struggle to break free. The sounds were like a voice saying, "There is no necessity for pain. Why then is the worst pain reserved for those who will not accept its necessity? We who hold the love and the secret of joy, to what punishment have we been sentenced for it? And by whom?" The sounds of torture became defiance. The statement of agony became a hymn to a distant vision for whose sake anything was worth enduring, even this. It was the song of rebellion and of a desperate quest. She sat still, her eyes closing, listening. The story of his life, Richard Halley's life, had been like a summary written to damn greatness by showing the price one pays for it. It had been a procession of years spent in garrets and basements, years that had taken the gray tinge of the walls, imprisoning a man whose music overflowed with violent color. It had been the gray of a struggle against long flights of unlighted tenement stairs, against frozen plumbing, against the price of a sandwich in an ill-smelling delicatessen store, against the faces of men who listened to music, their eyes empty. It had been a struggle without the relief of violence, without the recognition of finding a conscious enemy, with only a deaf wall to batter, a wall of the most effective soundproofing, indifference that swallowed the blows, chords, and screams, a battle of silence for a man who could give to sounds greater eloquence than they had ever carried, the silence of obscurity, of loneliness, of the nights when some rare orchestra played one of his works and he looked at the darkness, knowing that his soul went in trembling, widening circles from a radio tower through the air of the city, but there were no receivers tuned to it. The music of Richard Halley has the quality of the heroic. Our age has outgrown that stuff. It has a tone of ecstasy. Who cares for ecstasies nowadays, said another critic. So with that intro to Richard Halley, the struggle that he had made as an artist. I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Well, thank you, Ellen. That's excellent introduction. One of the things about Halley is he may be the first mystery or certainly one of the first mysteries that we come to in the novel. And you mentioned it before when the brakeman is whistling a piece of music that Dagny doesn't recognize, but she knows without a doubt that that Richard Halley must be the composer. What did they say? It reminds me. What did they say about Newton? That you know the lion by its paw print, and we could say the same about Ayn Rand. That description of Halley can only have been written by Ayn Rand, and similar to a lot of passages in Victor Hugo. You read that. That's got to be the uplifted emotional quality. That's got to be Hugo writing. And Dagny, this has this piece that Dagny's never heard before has the paw print of Richard Halley. She knows it has to. Only he could have composed it. So she talks to the brakeman. Now the brakeman, of course, probably recognizes Dagny. This is his boss. She runs the railroad. He's talking to his boss. He wants Halley's fifth, and Dagny says, "Well, he didn't write a fifth." And like you said, he didn't compose the fifth. Like you said, Ellen, he gets a little defensive. He gets a little weird. And so the mystery is that note is sounded right here. What is this? What is this mysterious concerto that hasn't been written, but obviously has been written? And Dagny, who's the big Halley fan, how come she doesn't know about? But this young brakeman on the train knows about it. It's the way Ayn Rand subtly sounds the mystery here, and introduces it. I mean, as we get along in the discussion with Halley, and we want to discuss his opera Phaeton.
Yeah,
and yeah, when we get to Phaeton, I'm gonna there's some interesting philosophical material here. But I think Shashana, probably has a bunch of stuff to say about Halley before we get to Phaeton.
Okay, well, thank you, Andy, and thanks, Ellen, for giving us Ein Mans Own Words. I think it's true that our introduction to Halley comes in terms of the fifth concerto that Dagny knows nothing about, and then the fourth concerto that she listens to and that she knows well and that means something to her. And it's the difference between the fifth is what's later called deliverance, the happiness, the fulfilled, and so on, and the fourth, which is rebellion, which is fighting. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that they both come from the mind of one man, but they're sort of in reverse order. As 4 usually comes before 5, and historically, the struggle would come before the deliverance. So I think that is even one aspect of our journey into this man, is that it's in reverse. That we find out it's almost as if the music itself is a kind of a flashback, and that's interesting. And I think that goes along with the mystery, because the way mysteries work is, you've got the clues are about what happened before. So I think that's right. He's a mystery, and the two musical pieces are part of that. Now, when you read about his struggle and all the years of his struggle,
right,
and even in fact, when you described what the music sounds like, you notice that the music is described in terms that wouldn't have to be unique to music. It's described in conceptual terms. The music is described in terms of the emotion rather than in terms of the technical aspects of music. There's nothing here about the tonic and the dominant and A sharp or anything like that. It's not about the music as music. It's about the music in the sense of what it accomplishes as a projection in art. And I think that's one reason why Richard Halley, in fact, is the artist and is the spokesperson later on for what the artist wants, because Ayn Rand does have a character, a minor character without a name within the novel, who is the writer, but Richard Halley kind of stands for the writer and the artist, and for Ayn Rand herself. Okay, for Ayn Rand herself, because that whole description of the frustration of having so much to say and no one out there hearing what she has to say. Now, of course, by the time she wrote Atlas Shrugged, there had been the Fountainhead, and the Fountainhead got a good response, very good response. That was in fact, that was important to her as an indication of what the culture was like, that there were some people who understood the fountainhead. Okay, but she had a lot of years before the fountainhead to go through the Richard Halley experience of all this to say, and they don't get it. Yeah, we the living not being understood. Screen treatment ideas that she had that were not taken up to be made on film. And I think that she had some concern about the fountainhead, is that if they don't get the fountainhead, if nobody understands that this is a novel about ideas, it's about individualism, that it would be as if she had written this amazing, composed, so to speak, this amazing gift, and there was no one to get it. There was no one to receive it. Because then, you know, in a work of art, it is what it is, regardless of the audience, but nonetheless, it's not intended to be just within the room of the artist or within the mind of the artist. It's out there. And so when she's describing Richard Halley and his experience before his success, and then of course, before his going on strike, it's that experience of, I have this, it is what it is, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? And so, you know, psychologically, that's a very depressing thought, that there's nobody here like me. There's nobody here to understand it. In a comic way, it reminds me actually of one of my favorite stories, which has been told about two playwrights. It's about Oscar Wilde and about George Bernard Shaw. And it could be true of either one of them. And it's something like this. The playwright has a new play opening. Okay. And one of his friends says to him, oh, you've got a new play opening. I hope the play will be a success. And the playwright says, well, I wrote the play. I know the play. I know the play is a success. I hope the audience will be a success.
Well,
okay. And I think that that's the psychological issue for the artist, is hoping that the audience is going to be a success.
so Richard
And-
Haley has self-esteem. There's no
Yes.
question about that.
Right.
And
He knew the
struggled
work was good.
then. You know, in his living conditions, he struggles, and he's looking for a receptive ear, which of course will be Daphne and Francisco. Yeah. Andy, do you want,
Yeah.
do you have more to say, or do you want to, Andy, do you want to jump in with the opera?
Yeah, a few things. Notice that in the Valley, Halley gives a concert for Dagny, and you know he knows how much she loves his music, and it's that whole scene and the interaction between them really integrates business with music, or business with art, and Ayn Rand dramatizing here what she calls the trader principle, because Halley says something to her in that scene like, you know, I get paid for my work, and one of the important ways I get paid here is having a listener who doesn't just profess to love my music, but somebody who actually understands it, you know, and appreciates it and gets it. Do you know how much that means, you know, to an artist? Because Halleys soul, like you said, Halleys soul is in this work, and Dagny gets it. Dagny's soul resonates with that, and she doesn't have to give him any money. I mean, she does. She buys his records. You know, she buys his records, or today's CDs. You know, and she goes to the concerts where his music is played, and you know, and buys the ticket and everything. And the money is one form for Richard Halley to get paid, but that's not the only form. And I think to him, not even the most important form. To have a viewer or a listener like Dagny who understands it and appreciates it and loves it, that means a lot to him. And I think Ayn Rand showing the trader principle transcends material exchange. Material exchange is part of the trader principle, trading value for value. You know, I can give money. I make money, say, selling my book on heroes. I take the money, go to the grocery store, buy food. You know, there's an exchange of material values, although the hero book has a lot of, you know, intellectual content in it. It's not just, it's a physical object, it's a book, but it's a book. You know, it's a book with a lot of ideas about heroes in it. But it's not just, the trait of principle Ayn Rand showing us here, I think, in the Halley-Dagny relationship is in part is about the exchange of material values, but there's the change of exchange of intellectual, spiritual values, as well, the appreciation of a great work of art. I mean, for instance, I think all of us, we bought Ayn Rand's books and we paid for them, and Ayn Rand got royalties and and everything, so she made some money, on just think about it. When we were kids, Halleys Shrugged was like 95 cents or something. You got that 95 cents was worth a lot more than than it is today. Still, it's 95 cents. For 95 cents, you got one, the greatest novel ever written with this extraordinary plot structure and fascinating characters, and two, you got the wisdom of the ages, the philosophy dramatized for 95 cents. No, we could not possibly pay Ayn Rand enough money for the value that she conferred on us artistically, philosophically. But part of the payment Ayn Rand gets from us is that we understand her work, we appreciate it, we love it, we try and bring it to a wider audience, because Ayn Rand's writing primarily for herself, to satisfy herself, but still, she wants to reach her brothers and sisters.
It's wonderful.
And that's a way we can pay her. Right now, we're paying Ayn Rand. And trying to bring her work to a wider audience.
Yeah, and that's that's the visibility principle, that a wonderful artist wants like-minded people. Haley wanted not Wesley Mouch to listen to him, but Dagny Taggart or Francisco or John Galt. He wants an audience that he values, who share the same values and respect the same standards. He also calls,
and Midas Mulligan and Ken Daniger, and even if they're tone deaf, but they understand.
Daniger, right. Yeah. And she talks about the looters in spirit in that same scene. We're at the end of the book, but she talks about that but Richard Halley is explaining to Dagny that if people had said, I didn't know how to appreciate you, and now I do, and I see, and they basically see in his violent, colorful, emotionally vibrant music what he sees in it or something similar, he would have forgiven them. But he said that wasn't the case. He said, what I saw in their faces and in the way they spoke when they crowded to praise me was the thing I had heard being preached to artists. Only I had never believed that any one human could mean it. They seemed to say that they owed me nothing, that their deafness had provided me with a moral goal. It had been my duty to struggle, to suffer, to bear for their sake. Whatever snares, contempt, injustice, torture they chose to inflict on me, to bear in order to teach them to enjoy my work. That was their rightful due and my proper purpose. And then I understood the nature of the looter in spirit, a thing I had never been able to conceive. I saw them reaching into my soul, just as they reached into Mulligan's pocket, reaching to expropriate the value of my person, just as they reached to expropriate my wealth. And he says that they thought that they were the goal of my music, to lift them up. But so that whole idea of both wanting the visibility, not needing it in a needy sense, but absolutely wanting the visibility from like-minded people. And the opposite, he wanted to stay as far away as he could from the people who were looters in spirit. And speaking of looters in spirit, you want to go to the opera, Andy?
The Phaeton?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story in and of itself. And then in addition to that, there's a whole leitmotif that runs through Atlas Shrugged, in that Ayn Rand recasts Greek mythology into objectivist principles. That's just brilliantly done. But Phaeton, the original story, of course, was he was the son of Helios, right? The god of the sun, and Helios let Phaeton try and drive the chariot of the sun, pulling the sun up, I'm pulling the sun around the earth, as they thought back in the ancient world. But he was a kid; he couldn't control the horses, and so the sun was in danger of crashing into the earth and starting this enormous conflagration. And Zeus, in his ever benevolence, that strikes the kid with a lightning bolt and kills him. So that's the Greek myth, and in Halleys opera, of course, he reverses it. It's triumphant. It's a triumphant story, and that is Phaeton succeeds, and he drives the chariot of the sun across the sky, in glorious triumph. He's just a kid. He's driving the chariot of the sun successfully. He must be a Francisco d'Anconia, of the gods, but he's so the opera is an enormous triumph. What it's about?
Not initially.
No, I mean the story. Yeah, the story. Yeah, the story of the opera. Commercially, yeah, you're right. It was first performed, I think, when Halley was very young. He was in his 20s.
Yeah,
yeah,
very young.
And then it got the audience didn't love it. The critics panned it. It was roughly like 20 years later when it was resuscitated, and by then the world seemed to be ready. At least some of the music, the music lovers in the world were ready for it, and it was a big success, and everybody loved it. And right after that, he disappeared. Obviously, Galt reached him, but it's a big mystery to Dagny and to everybody else in the outside world who's not privy to the strike. So why would, after 20 years or more of struggle, why would Halley, who now is like Phaeton himself, the Phaeton of his opera, succeeding? He's at the peak of his powers. He's in his 40s. He's at the height of his fame and success, and he walks away from it all. So it's part of the, it's part of the mystery. And I just wanted to add here about the way Ayn Rand uses Greek mythologies so brilliantly in Atlas Shrugged, and she turns it around. Greek mythology tends to be pretty pessimistic generally, like in the story of Phaeton, or in the story of Daedalus and Icarus, who flies too close to the sun and his wax wings burn, he crashes into the sea and he dies. They tend to be pessimistic. But of course, objectivism is a very benevolent and the Greek myths are pessimistic and malevolent generally, but objectivism is very optimistic and benevolent. As you see, even in so we see in the in the story of Phaeton, we see Ayn Rand showing in the Phaeton of Halley's opera, we see Ayn Rand showing a benevolent universe premise here, that values can be achieved by rational beings. The universe is open to value achievement by rational beings. But you know what, and of course the Prometheus myth. I love what Ayn Rand does with the Prometheus myth in Atlas Shrugged, because in the original myth, Prometheus is a titan, brings fire to man, and is a great benefactor of man. And Zeus, like I said, always benevolent, right? Zeus, angry at Prometheus for elevating human beings up to a status approaching the gods, chains him to a rock in the Caucasus and has vultures perennially eating out his liver. And I think it's Francisco, isn't it, who's privy to all what's going on with the strike. Francisco, tells his listeners that when they want to know who is John Galt, and it was Francisco, isn't it, who says John Galt is Prometheus, who withdrew his fire until the day when men withdraw their vultures. I mean, that is just taking the mythology, and it's an impeccable statement of Galt's strike. I mean, it's just perfect. And of course, Ayn Rand expressing, objectivist principles here, that, the men of the mind will go on strike until and unless the men of the world renounce the initiation of force and the altruist code that regards it as their duty, for these creators to sacrifice for them, and that they have the right to force them to do it. So the use of the Prometheus myth is just spectacular. And of course, the Atlas myth is the central, conceit of the story. And when Francisco tells Reardon, Atlas is straightened under the load of again a titan. He's carrying the world on his shoulders, and he's staggering with his last strength. And he says, Francisco says to Riordan, what would you tell him? And Riordan says, I don't know. What would you tell him? You know, and Francisco says, I tell him to shrug. It's not your duty to save all of these people. You have the right to live. And, you know, if you value the world and all these people, then, you know, go to it. But it's not an unchosen duty. Francisco gives him, you know, Francisco would give Atlas an Aristotelian advice rather than a Kantian advice. There's no unchosen duty here. It's if it's a value to you and you choose it, you know the way Francisco himself would, let's say, for Dagny, because he loves her.
So
wait, Ellen, the crescendo is coming here.
oh, okay.
But in musical terms, even though it's so minor in the story, the Odysseus and the Sirens myth, a lot of people just read over that. Even Roger Marsh. I know Shashana didn't read over it. You know, even very educated people will read over it because Roger Marsh of Marsh Electric in Colorado. So I don't know what tempted these great Colorado producers to leave their work. We all love our work. He says, I'm going to have myself chained to the desk, you know, so that if the great attraction ever comes to me, I won't be able to leave my desk, which is, of course, a reference to Odysseus and the Sirens. Odysseus had himself chained to the mast and had wax plugged up his sailor's ears. So he was the only person, Odysseus was the only person, in the Odyssey who ever lived to hear the Sirens song and survive. Well, Roger Moss is going to be Odysseus, and yet Dagny realizes, like 3 weeks later, whatever, he was gone. He left, he quit. And so, the brilliant use of the Odysseus and the Sirens myth there is so subtle, so well done. But again, always, recasting Greek mythology to, and in the Odysseus version here, in the Roger Marsh version in Atlas, of course, Ayn Rand showing us that your work and the love of your work is the meaning of your life, and you can't give that up. And of course, Roger Marsh doesn't. He goes to the valley where his creative work belongs to him, fully to him, and all the people appreciate that it belongs to him. And they honor it. So he's got the right to live his right to live his own life, and keep the product of his mental and physical effort is fully recognized and protected. So Ayn Rand always showing objectivist themes by use of Greek mythology in this brilliantly vivid way.
Right. So I'm going to jump in, then turn it over to you, Shashana, if that's okay. Just on the opera, on the day that he presented his opera again, he was 43 years old. He only showed it for one night. Watch his psychology now. This is from Atlas, from a quote. Dagny was in the audience. She saw him, meaning Richard Halley, being pushed out on the stage. She saw him facing the enormous spread of waving arms and cheering heads. He stood without moving, a tall, emaciated man with graying hair. He did not bow. He did not smile. He just stood there, looking at the crowd. His face had the quiet, earnest look of a man staring at a question. And then the mystery thickens, as you say. He's one of the first mysteries, Andy. On the day after Shoshana, on the day after the opening, Richard Halley retired, and he sold his rights to the opera, and he wasn't going to make a lot of money for it. And then he disappeared for 8 years. Nobody had heard from him. And just the idea of his mind, he was looking out. He wasn't saying, "Ooh, do they like me?" He was saying, "Do I like my audience?" Which brings it back to what you were saying earlier. Do I like my audience? And unfortunately, he didn't see Dagny in it. But Shoshana, jump right in.
Sure. No, I think that what you're saying is, it's very good to pay attention to what Halley's reaction was, because it's one more thing that connects him with Ayn Rand. And what Andy was saying about Ayn Rand using Greek mythology for her own purposes, that's exactly what Halley does in his own creation here, because this is a particular thing, opera with a plot and a subject matter, and other times he's got a more abstract theme. So it's not as if he's always doing the Greek mythology, but when he does, he makes it his own. I think that the notion of querying one's own alleged success and not viewing popularity and acclaim as the goals
Well put.
it was very important for Halley, and it's important for Ayn Rand, because when you think about it, as I've said before, he's the artist rather than specifically the musical composer. The descriptions of his music are in terms of the emotional effect and not in terms of musical technique. And here he is, big success after years of struggle. It's a lot like Ayn Rand when The Fountainhead comes out. Now, of course, when Richard Halley is described as being 43. When The Fountainhead comes out, Ayn Rand is 38, but it's 1943. So it's almost as if there's even like a verbal echo of that. And her reaction was, of course, she was glad about the sales, but she was very concerned that she wanted people to appreciate what was important about the novel, and why Lorraine Pruitt's review meant so much to her, because it identified it as being about ideas and identified individualism as the theme. And just having the numbers of best-selling books, well, that's good. It's good to sell the rights for the movie so that there's money to buy time to write the next book. But it's not as if she defined her success by the struggle for popularity, so to speak, being over, or by the numbers of copies sold. That wasn't the measurement, and as it wasn't for Halley. It's even true that it was around that time of publishing The Fountainhead that Ayn Rand herself came up with the idea of going on strike. And because her writing was for her, and I'm sure you know the story, that her friend Isabel Patterson told her that she had a duty, that she had a responsibility to people, to write and to express her ideas and nonfiction and so on. And Ayn Rand said, well, suppose I just quit. Suppose I and all the other creative people went on strike and didn't do what you're suggesting. Well, that's what Richard Halley did. I don't know anything to you. You don't know my life. I didn't do it for you, and I'm not going to keep doing it for you. I write for myself and for those with whom I can trade, and that's not you. Right. So I think there's really a close identification between her and Halley, and it shows up also in that wonderful speech where Halley talks about trading and being understood. He also talks about his contempt for the kinds of artists who say they don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine how Ayn Rand would think, would say, right. If someone said, well, it just sort of came to me. And right. Well, Halley says, for them, it pours out of him like vomit, that they don't think, because she's the kind of writer who does think, and she has contempt for the idea that it makes your art better if you don't think about it, that thinking and art are separated from each other. So she's like Halley, she lets Halley speak for her. And it's very moving, really, because when you look at him, you see that in certain ways, he's a quiet character for someone whose music speaks for him. And yet, well, that first chapter of the book is called The Theme. And the theme is that piece of music that we hear at the beginning, and we hear it again at the end, right, in the valley. And that the theme, as themes do, goes all the way through the book. Yeah. It even shows up in parody. More Liddy. Yeah.
Shashana, I can't wait to read your book, because I didn't know that detailed story. So I hope it's in it on the biography of Ayn Rand. So,
let me jump in here for a second. While you were talking, Shashana, something occurred to me, when you were talking about how the artist creates, for himself or herself in accordance with his own vision, and how and the relationship between Halley and Dagny, and the way Ayn Rand integrates business with art in that relationship. If you've read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, or saw the movie version of it with Michael Fassbender and Kate Winslet, which I strongly recommend, by the way, it spends 50% of its time showing what a messy personal life Steve Jobs had, but the 50% that it spends on Jobs' professional life really shows him as a Howard Roark type visionary, entrepreneur of integrity. Because Jobs keeps saying a computer's like a work of art, and Wozniak said, no, it isn't. Wozniak understandably wants to, meet market demand. We're gonna jack it up, and the customers are gonna love it. And Steve Jobs says, no, we don't care what the customers think. We're the experts here. And he I don't remember who he uses as an analogy, which artist he uses, whether it's Leonardo or Michelangelo or Mozart, whoever it is. But he said, Mozart doesn't go out to the audience asking them what notes follow here. They don't know. The customers don't know. We know. We're the experts here. We make the computer. It's like a work of art. We make the computer the way a great artist creates a work of art. It's done according to our vision, in accordance with our standards and our criteria. And we have enough respect for our brothers and sisters that they will see it eventually. They'll see how great it is. And of course, it took Jobs many years to reach that commercial success, but he did, with his vision intact. It's fascinating. It's fascinating here. And you're talking about Shashana, because I think you're absolutely right. This is the story of Richard Halley, but Ein Mans writing her own story here. The artistic integrity you create in accordance with your own vision and your own standards, with sufficient respect for the rest of the human race that you expect them, at least in time, to see.
So I know we need to start wrapping up. I want to mention one thing, and I don't want it to be the ending, but we didn't talk about Heaven's in My Backyard, that wonderful piece of slime that Miss Dagny, this is at the anniversary party. Mort Liddy has written a unique piece that he copied directly from Richard Halley. And it's mud. Dagny said the notes broke. It was as if a handful of mud and pebbles had been flung at the music. And what followed was the sound of the rolling and dropping rather than the rising, the way she describes Halley's. The great statement of joy had become the giggling of a barroom. It was the melody that supported it like a spine. And it says, pretty good, Mort Liddy was smiling at his friends boastfully and nervously. Best movie score of the year, got me a prize, got me a long-term contract. Yeah, this was my score for Heaven's in Your Backyard. Heaven's in Your Backyard. And that's the scene when Dagny takes the bracelet, the Reardon metal bracelet from Lillian, and she calms down. That music's going on in the background. But after she gets the Reardon metal bracelet and gives away exchanges it for the diamond one, she feels much calmer. But just the fact that there are people out there who just copy, take great works of art and make a mockery of it. So
this is sacrilege. This is sacrilege to that.
Yeah, it is.
She's right. It is sacrilege.
So
I guess I've got a different perspective on that. I think that Mort Liddy is not as bad as some of those other characters at the party, because they want the government to coerce people to buy their stuff, like Val Eubank. And Mort Liddy, he's not, he's a Hollywood composer, but he sells it through his own larceny, and he steals from the best.
But he's still a looter in spirit.
This is true.
He is a looter in spirit.
No, you're right, Shashana. But he's like Guy Franken. Guy Franken is copying the best, the Greeks, but he's still second-handed. But it's also he's Baudelarizing and vulgarizing.
Yes,
vulgarizing. That's the part that's so bad.
Yeah, this magnificent work of art.
Yes,
it reminds me, Ayn Rand's Years in Hollywood. Did she speak? She spoke about their incommunicable vulgarity of spirit. Boy, Ayn Rand had a way with words, didn't she?
Yeah.
This is vulgarity. This is the vulgarity.
You're right. He's not a heroic character. Yeah. On the other hand, he's stealing from someone good. That's better than stealing from someone bad.
But if you gotta steal, you steal from the best.
He's vulgarizing it. It's like Ayn Rand's view of a beautiful woman, and then you put a cold sore on her. it's, you know, I was doing Zumba the other day, and there's a new song out, you know, raindrops on roses and you know,
Yeah.
and it's done with my favorite things being pretty gross, very sexualized, and the tune is still the same. It's still the same spine. But I was so turned off by that. It's like, don't ruin my great music. Don't vulgarize it. So I am not a fan of Martin Liddy. I think he's a looter in spirit. But
He
even though
is.
I understand that you
Yeah.
can copy the great,
Shash-
and that point is
Shashana's got a point there, you know, of all of these guys, because in a different context, let's say if Dagny had to sit down and have a conversation with Mort Liddy, and he knows, he probably knows she's, you know, big fan of Halley, he probably say, honestly, he said, I love Halley too. You know, that's why I stole from him. Yeah, that's why I stole from Halley. Yeah, Dagny go, yeah, good going. You know, at least you stole from the best.
I mean, Balfe Eubank, he wouldn't plagiarize. I mean, not that we favor plagiarism, but Balfe Eubank wouldn't plagiarize Victor Hugo.
No,
Oh,
it would be Zola.
okay, so he gets
Or
one run out of hell.
maybe Joyce or Samuel Beckett. Yeah, one rung in hell. That's right. That's right.
I need to the way that Ayn Rand uses music throughout Atlas Shrugged was what really hit me this time. And I just want to go through a little bit of what I observed. At the beginning, well, she hears it through the brakeman, the fifth concerto, but when McNamara quits, she hears the fourth. When she's with Francisco, and when he tells her to leave Taggart Transcontinental, what if I told you to leave? She said, what if you told me to commit suicide? The fourth is what's on their mind. When she's with Mort Liddy is the fourth. The first run on the John Galt line, Ayn Rand uses Haley's Fifth, the Concerto of Deliverance, which he wrote for John Galt. And when, let's see, there's in the cabin, when Francisco thinks that Dagny has quit for good, he's whistling the fifth coming up, the Concerto of Deliverance. When she's flying to the Afton after Quentin Daniels, it's the fourth. You know, there's some anxiety. When she gets into Atlantis, she hears the fifth, and it's from Richard Halley, who's playing. And then when they're in Galt's garret, they're kissing. She sees the picture of herself that he's had in his on his wall, and it's the fifth. And then when they're in the valley again, it's the fifth. And then she ends it with Haley by saying that Francisco's laughter at the end, Francisco couldn't hear it, but his laughter in planning how they're going to rebuild the world matched Haley's fifth, which was permeating through the percolate.
Okay. No,
Halley was playing.
Right.
Halley was playing on the piano. Yeah.
So this was wonderful. Any final words with Richard Halley?
I'm looking to get up on Amazon and buy some of his CDs.
Okay.
Well, we have been speaking jocularly about writing sequels and prequels and so on. I think that we not only do we need the fourth and the fifth, and of course the fifth is based on the music in Bariska Dunoff. You know that, right? Yeah. You know that was music Ayn Rand listened to while she was working on Atlas Shrugged.
I don't know that.
She called it the love music.
I want your book. I want your book.
Yeah.
So Shashana, you're ready for
YouTube.
Shashana, I take it you're ready for Halley's sixth and seventh.
Yes.
But
and how about first, second, and third? Just saying.
Yeah, that's right. In the prequel, right?
In the Valley, he's produced more than he ever produced. We just don't get to hear it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's end on that positive note, and we enjoyed Richard Halley, and we continue to enjoy him because we carry him within us. Ayn Rand gave us that wonderful character. Thank you, Dr. Andrew Bernstein and Dr. Shashana Milgram, and I'm Dr. Ellen Kenner. And thank you, Rosie.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Ellen. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks,
Richard Halley. Thanks, Ayn Rand.
Definitely. Thank you, Ayn Rand.